Welcome to the Mio on MMA podcast. Today we are talking about the Stephen Wonderboy Thompson Kevin Holland card that is coming up this Saturday, December the 3rd, 2022. And, for a fight night card, it's pretty good. You got some name value at the top of the card. Wonderboy, obviously, former title contender, former challenger. You've got RDA, former champion, Rafael Dos Anjos on the card. You have former championship contender Taito Ivasa on the card, although one that I don't really think is probably in there anymore after his performance against Cyril Gahn, but it is what it is. And there's a lot of other, there are very few debuting fighters on this card. In fact, I think there's only one. I think it's only Francis Marshall who's making his UFC debut. So you have established credentials here. You have some veterans. You have some people who are the old guard that maybe need to be surpassed. And you have some hot prospects coming up. You've got Sergey Pavlovich, who, I'm going to say it right now, probably is a future title contender. You have Roman Dolidze, who has kind of bizarrely become something. And I don't know what it is, but we'll get to that. You've got Mateus Nicolau, who I still don't quite know what to make of. And then you've got Philip Rowe, who's all kinds of interesting. Emily Ducote might be a championship contender, getting a big test in Angela Hill here. But after saying all of those nice things, and even the bottom of the card is actually, I think, very solid matchmaking. Very intriguing fights. Not necessarily in who's going to win, but in the action they're going to produce. You do also have some really feel bad fights on the card because you do have Darren Elkins versus Jonathan Pierce. You do have Michael Johnson versus Mark Diakese. You do have Clay Guida versus Scott Holtzman, and all three of those fights are in a row. So there's some down parts. And then, of course, at the top of the card, you also have what probably is a sacrificial lamb of an aging fighter in Stephen Thompson. Betting news for this fight card. Here's an interesting one. And it's a bit of a bizarre one. And it's one where I'm actually going to have to defend the UFC here for a moment. A lot of the Canadian bet makers, or at least a lot of the Ontario ones, are not including this event on betting odds. They're not taking bets on this fight card. But they are taking bets on the one on Prime card that is tomorrow. And they were taking bets on the PFL card. If you're going to take MMA bets, I want to be clear here. The UFC and gambling is in a weird spot right now. You have one of the largest gyms represented on the UFC roster and their coach banned from cage side. You've had the TJ Dillashaw, frankly, fiasco, the Derek Minner fiasco. And this obviously has undermined credibility of MMA as a betting sport all around. There are multiple investigations now being conducted in regards to how, I'm not sure, straightforward, fair, sporting the betting lines are and how much insider training is going on. The problem is that if you're excluding the UFC, you almost have to exclude the entire sport because those same people are active in other promotions. Those same people and same lack of safeguards presumably exists in PFL. And in one, you have all kinds of corruption with Chatri Shidotong and how he runs that whole thing. So it's a bit weird. I'm defending the UFC, not in saying they haven't done anything wrong, but if you're going to ban the UFC from your sporting book, you have to ban MMA entirely because it's not like they're doing anything that no one else is doing. But anyways, hopefully that gets resolved. Hopefully, to be honest, hopefully James Krause ends up not being a coach because I've said this when I broke it down. If you're a James Krause fighter right now, I wouldn't trust him as a coach. This has nothing to do with the morality of betting. This is to do with the idea that like you have someone who is legitimately betting on his own fighters and possibly betting against his own fighters. That's not a coach I'd feel remotely comfortable with. And I've never been the biggest fan of James Krause as a coach. Like I've kind of understood that he owns the gym in the Midwest, in the St. Louis, Chicago, Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, Iowa area, the best one. But I've never been impressed with it, and now you've got this. But anyways, enough of that. Let's get to the fight card because it's a pretty good one. I'm looking forward to it. Like I said, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, Kevin Holland is your main event. Holland 3 inches taller, 6 inches longer, and is the betting favorite here, coming in at minus 156 to minus 170. Wonderboy is the underdog, plus 122 to plus 150. That is if you are in an area where you can bet on this fight. And part of me, obviously, came into this. In fact, the large majority of me came into this fight pretty ready to pick Holland. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson is in decline. He's lost a couple of fights now in a row. He's looked faded. That's, I think, the big thing is that there are things that he was able to avoid before that he no longer is. He's looking very pressurable. His foot speed is slowing down. He doesn't have the dynamicism in his kicks anymore. He doesn't even really have that dashing ability with his punches. In a nutshell, he's getting old. I actually really should have made a note of how old he is. I want to think the answer is 38, but I could be mistaken. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Of course, it could. 39. Okay, so I was off. At 39 years old, and having developed a style that was always going to rely on speed inherently, means he's in downfall. But, I do have to say this. He still hasn't lost a pure striking battle. And what I mean by that is obviously, he got knocked out by Anthony Pettis with the Superman punch. And he did lose to Darren Till in a almost entirely kickboxing-oriented game. And you could even say he lost to Tyron Woodley predominantly because of the striking. But he was beating Pettis up until the knockout. And let's be honest, that Darren Till fight is an abortion. And the Woodley fight is also an abortion. And the Woodley fight also had the threat of wrestling, obviously being a big part of it. So, is that a glimmer of hope for Wonderboy fans that, yes, he's looked bad, but he did, not long ago, just beat Jeff Neal, did just beat Jeff Neal. In fairly clean fashion. And Jeff Neal, who does actually have a loss to Kevin Holland, ironically, is kind of a fairly good port for Holland. Like, Holland is a more complex fighter. He is more creative. He is more diverse, both from a technical standpoint and what he likes to do. His target selection is more diverse. Like, the problem with Jeff Neal is Jeff Neal has all the physicality, the speed, the power, etc. in the world, but he's incredibly predictable. He doesn't have a lot of entries into the pocket. He is almost exclusively a head puncher, doesn't go to the body, doesn't really go to the legs. And when you know your opponent's entry and your opponent's target, your opponent's beginning and his end, it does make it a lot easier to deal with. And Kevin Holland doesn't have that problem. Kevin Holland has a completely separate problem, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, but he is more diverse at entry. Part of me still does think, though, that, like, Wonderboy can shut that down. But then we have the problem where, like, Holland's also willing to wrestle. Holland's a good grappler. Holland is creative, like I said. And then I'm swung back into, like, picking, like, well, of course it's Holland. Anyone with, like, a high-end athletic ability, a good reach, creativity, speed on the feet, an optional grappling game probably should beat Wonderboy. But here's the big. By the way, just a side note here. Watching the Jeff Neal fight back, the fight itself wasn't anything I didn't remember, but I had actually forgot that the commentary mentioned that Jeff Neal had suggested that training with Uriah Hall and Ryan Spann, and also excuse the noise in the background, there may be a washing machine you can hear, were good ports for ya boy, Wonderboy. And I think that fight proved, and I think any fan worth his salt probably knows that's not the answer. Which kind of goes back to the whole, like, even guys who train at really good gyms are under serious misconceptions about MMA. And it's kind of stunning. Anyways, what I was going to get to. My problem with it whenever I'm picking Holland, and it honestly doesn't matter the opponent, is that he will often fight to what is fun versus what is actually a winning condition. So, does he go out there and just give Wonderboy the fight that he wants? But he's also been really, really willing to like turn it up and make fights ugly when he starts to lose. So what I'm coming up with is this is going to look kind of like the Curtis Millender fight with Kevin Holland back in 2017. And honestly, if you want to get a feel of like Kevin Holland and all of his Kevin Hollandly goodness, just watch that fight. It's an LFA fight. It's up on Fight Pass. Or no, it's not up on Fight Pass. But it's back from LFA 13, back in 2017. But it's like, it encapsulates it so perfectly of Kevin Holland doing the right thing and having success and then going and doing something exceptionally dumb. The genius and the stupidity at all times. But I do, at the end of the day, have to pick Holland. I think Wonderboy's going to have his moments. I think Holland's going to have to be, at times, violently corrected into doing the right thing. But there are just too many avenues for him to win. There's the possibility of just catching him with a hot shot. There's the possibility of taking him down and subbing him. There's the possibility of taking him down and pounding him out. There's a possibility of just kind of letting Wonderboy fade a little bit and just kind of out-voluming into a decision. There's too many ways. I've got Holland by TKO. Another thing to note, Holland has been talking about how he might just retire after this fight again, which is another fly in the ointment of me picking Holland. But like, I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to stick with it and not talk myself out of this. But he did randomly retire after losing to Chimaev and then unretired. Now he's here talking about retirement again. And I like the things he's talking about because most of what he's talking about is like the lack of consistent rules for UFC fighters. Pretty noteworthy considering the episode I did on Conor McGregor and USADA. Like, obviously something I agree with, but it also does suggest that I don't know if he's 100% focused on fighting. And that does worry me. But I am going to go with him. Rafael Dos Anjos, Brian Barberena is the co-main event. Barberena 4 inches taller, 2 inches longer. So he's the bigger man, which is nothing new for RDA. RDA, of course, was a lightweight champion, has fought most of his career at lightweight. Barberena has been as high as middleweight and not looked that small. So, like, you know, there is that size comparison to really come in there. Barberena has resurged after I honestly thought he was done after that Jason Witt fight. I thought he was done. I thought the durability was trashed. I thought his ability to continue on with his chin fading was going to be terrible. And then he's gone on and, well, the highlight was beating Robbie Lawler. And obviously beating Matt Brown too. Like, arguably his biggest wins have come after that. It's really surprising. But his best wins are over guys who are going to let him set the tone, let him set the pace, let him be the deeper, more, not necessarily technical fighter, but like the more creative and the more diverse fighter. And I just don't see RDA doing that. RDA has a good, diverse striking game. And whenever the opponent has been able to do that, been able to attack on multiple levels, it hasn't really worked out for him. Like, he lost to Randy Brown, Leon Edwards, Chad Laprise, even Colby Covington to a certain extent. These are all like fights of like where he had to defend against multiple things, and it slowly broke him down over time and got the win. And RDA's win over Renato Moicano, given the hot shit that Moicano is right now, really looks a lot better in hindsight. Looks a lot better. He's not what he used to be. He's not as fast. He's not as explosive. But everything does function. Because unlike the old man we talked about before with Steve Wonderboy Thompson, and to be clear, Wonderboy had good technical foundations. He still had a style that was more of a look at how fast and how dynamic I can be. Whereas RDA, it's building it off of solid combinations, low kicks, threat of a takedown, working the takedown in, being a great grappler. All of these things are still there. He seems to still be able to take a little bit of punishment. Yes, he fades a little bit more. Yes, I had faith in him beating Rafael Fiziev, and he didn't. But this is Brian Barberena. This is a way different. This is a guy who's on a similar career path to him. And that's why I'm picking RDA to win by decision. And it looks like that's not a hot pick because I think RDA is the biggest favorite on the card. Let me just quickly double check before I commit to it. No, he is the biggest favorite on the card. Minus 550 to minus 620. Barberena's plus 390 to plus 430. I'm not sure I would go that wide. Like, it is admittedly probably the fight I am the most confident on the card. But at the same time, that feels a little bit wide. Like, RDA being a minus 600 against anybody right now feels a little bit wide. And, I mean, we were talking about how old Steve Wonderboy Thompson is. How old is RDA now? RDA is 38, so yeah, there. He's in the same ballgame. Like, I'm not really sure a 38-year-old against a legit UFC caliber fighter should be minus 600, but he is. There you go. So as much as I don't think Barberena is going to win, if you're looking for a dog, if you're looking for someone to make a big payday, Barberena probably is your ticket. Biggest underdog on the card. Matthias Nicolau versus Matt Schnell. Schnell, 2 inches taller, 4 inches more in reach. Matt Schnell's a weird one because for those who don't know, my first exposure to Matt Schnell was the MTV reality show Caged. It was one of those things that, like, we had one TV and you gotta, sometimes kind of slip your desires into your TV time to trick the siblings, which I had 2 of, into watching something that you like. And my sister was a reality TV junkie, so MTV Cage kind of felt like a little cross-section that could possibly be utilized. And it did work. What I'm getting at, though, is it gave me a greater insight to the insecurities, the general characteristics of Schnell, and it made me a fan. It did honestly make me a fan. But it also means that I had those that insight to his insecurities and his hangups and his neuroses and so on. And it's kind of like, it's kind of led to me not ever being able to buy into him as a top fighter. Tony Kelly was on the same show. And a similar, didn't really have the same problem with Kelly because he just was a completely different character. But it did kind of leave me having a harder time ever really grasping him as a top guy. And he is. He fights at a high velocity or high volume pace, high volume base, fights really fast, incredibly game, but also incredibly hittable. Chin is not super durable, but he has recovery to make up for it. He's got that dog in him, and he's quite well-rounded, actually. He's a threat on the feet. He's a threat on the ground, and he's really turned into something. I don't like this fight. And the reason I don't like this fight has nothing to do with, like, fandom or who I want to win, because I'm a reasonably big fan of Matthias Nicolau as well. I do think that there is significantly something there, and I do want someone to be built into a top flyweight to add to the top of one of the best divisions in MMA. But I kind of look at this as almost like the Tyson Nam Matt Schnell fight, only worse. And that was like probably Matt Schnell's worst fight in the UFC because he was up against a guy who has a lot of power. Nam has that. Nicolau has that. Is more of a dedicated counter striker. Is an elusive guy with his footwork. Is a good defensive striker. And will counterpunch very well. And has that venom. And I said, Schnell doesn't have a great chin. So I think it's going to breed a little bit of fear in Schnell. Because he's not, well, he is kind of dumb. His views on fighter pay and the role and the rights of fighters is not great. We'll put it that way. But it could make him tentative. It could make this a low-paced flyweight fight, which no one really wants. So, like, I would have given Schnell someone more scrappy, brawly, destructive, like the type of fight that he had with Sumu Darji. In the end, I'm going with Nicolau by decision. He's not likely to get taken down. He has that counter game, like I said. He's not likely to finish Schnell because I think he'll hurt him with a counter punch and then not really turn on the gas because he doesn't do that. He's an inherently low output counter fighter. And but he's very evasive. Like, he's not like Tyson Nam, who at various points got frustrated and kind of did consent later in the fight to exchanging with Schnell, and that's how Schnell ended up winning a decision on volume. Nicolau's not going to do that. He does not mind if the crowd is booing him. He does not mind if it's a slow pace and nothing's really happening. That's his skill. He's fine with it. Whereas Nam is a little bit more wanting the knockout. Nicolau is willing to win boring. I'm surprised he's such a favorite because I feel like Nicolau is just like super under the radar despite having beat like Mano Kopp and David Dvorak. He's minus 370 to minus 400. One of the biggest favorites on the card. Might be the second biggest favorite on the card. I was surprised by that. And another live dog is Schnell at plus 285 to plus 310. But I do have to go with Nicolau. It's the sort of thing like, and I'm going to talk about this later with a couple of fighters lower on the card, but just that physical durability and the physical limitations of Schnell make him hard to pick. And then we have Tai Tuivasa Sergey Pavlovich, which is a fight I'm a little let down by. Because to be honest, when I saw it on this card, I was expecting there to be betting odds that favor Tuivasa. I was expecting Tuivasa's sort of popularity, the shoey, the personality, the fact that he is a super lovable dude, Mark Hunt version 2.0, although in some ways worse than Mark Hunt, in some ways better than Mark Hunt, to be the favorite. And he's not. He's a plus 170 to plus 195 underdog, and Pavlovich at minus 213 to minus 235 is the favorite. I'm picking Pavlovich. He's taller by an inch, has 9 inches more in reach. And the thing is that you might be like, okay, but what has Pavlovich done in the UFC? Like, their biggest win in the UFC, both of them, and overall, is Derek Lewis. They both beat Derek Lewis. They both knocked him out. That's their high watermark. The thing is that what Pavlovich did to Derek Lewis is something he's been doing a lot of. Honestly, if you want to dig it up, his fight with Alexei Kudin was the fight that really had me going, Sergey Pavlovich is a legitimate prospect. I think this guy is going to fight for a title. I think this guy is going to be a force in the heavyweight division probably for a fairly long time because I think he's still in his 20s. 30. Okay. He's 30 years old, which might as well be in his 20s for heavyweight. This is heavyweight after all. Yes, he did lose to Alistair Overeem in his debut. He was handled by Alistair Overeem in a lot of ways. But he's got a well put together striking game. He's got good defense. He can wrestle. He can grapple. There are concerns about his cardio because he's often a really quick finisher, but like, is Tai Tuivasa really the guy to maybe stretch him out and make him get tired? Not really. Tuivasa is going to let him fight at the pace he wants to fight at. He's going to have range on Tuivasa. Tuivasa does not really offer any kind of wrestling threat. that kind of neuters him a little bit in terms of it. I think Pavlovich can take his shots. I think he's defensively sound enough to avoid Tuivasa's big ass meat hammers. And I'm going Pavlovich by TKO. But in fairness, Tuivasa does have a puncher's chance. He's always going to have a puncher's chance because he does throw incredibly big hooks. Incredibly powerful hands. So, there is that. Jack Hermansson versus Roman Dolidze. Dolidze an inch taller. An inch and a half in reach, though, to Jack Hermansson. Interesting. If Dolidze was a southpaw, I'd probably instantly pick him because Hermansson's ability to do it with a southpaw is really bad. But at the same time, I have not. The problem with Jack Hermansson is I've gone from being impressed with him to being unimpressed with him so many times in his UFC run. Like, if we go way back to the beginning, he came in against Scott Askham. That was nice. Then he lost to Cesar Fajea. Then he beat Alex Nicholson and Brad Scott, kind of expected. Lost to Santos. Had a big performance against Talis Laitis. Submitted Gerald Mershart, very cool. Submitted David Branch, very cool. Beat Jacare. I'm like, oh, this guy is going to do something. Then he gets stopped by Jared Cannonier. Then he wins a fight with Kelvin Gastelum, which was way more about Gastelum being bad. And then he loses to Marvin Vittori. Then he beats Edmund Shabazian, exposing him there. Then he loses to Sean Strickland. And then he beats Chris Curtis in a fight that really was more about Curtis not really fighting to a win condition. I was very disappointed in Chris Curtis in that fight. And Roman Dolidze's kind of been the opposite. I've kept going. This guy's just a clinch bully. He's not that good. He's not even that good of a clinch bully. He's just strong. He's just big. And then he obliterates Kyle Daukaus and Phil Haas, who I think are pretty good fighters, pretty on the level with Hermansson. Haas is a worse technical fighter, but a better athlete. And Daukaus is probably a better technician and a similar athlete. Like, does Hermansson actually have a way to avoid the clinch? He fought at range. Like, I guess you could argue he fought at range against Chris Curtis. But Chris Curtis wasn't really pressuring him in any way. Chris Curtis desperately wanted him to come to Chris Curtis so Chris Curtis could implement his own counter game. Like, what we basically learned from Hermansson versus Curtis is that Chris Curtis is actually quite poor if you just are like, I want to have a boring range fight with you. Or it can be an exciting range fight, but you're going to have to do something to make it exciting. And Curtis couldn't do that. Dolidze will come to Hermansson. He will pressure him. He does know that he wants the clinch. And he does actually have a pretty decent outside kicking game. I really dislike Dolidze. There's the whole like stole Cheyenne Velismus from GP buys and thing. And I get it, whatever. There's speculation that the buys marriage really wasn't particularly real or whatever. There's all this. But like at the same time, you stole someone's girl from the gym. He just comes off as a super dickhead. So douchey. But I don't know. I can't keep picking against him, can I? And say that I'm like being realistic about this. Because like the dude did go out there and really did mess up Phil Haas and did mess up Kyle Daukaus. I'm going to go with Dolidze to win a decision. Hermansson's tough. He's been finished a couple times. But like the finishes that have tended to get him are like very dynamic. Very heavy, like heavy-handed dynamic strikers. And Dolidze's heavy-handed, has heavy kicks and everything. But like it's a little too one shot at a time. Not really a ton of setup. Not a lot of nuance to it. Not a lot of dynamicism to it. And like I said, I predict this will largely take place in the clinch largely. So I see it going the distance. I see Dolidze winning. He is the underdog at plus 140 to plus 165. Hermansson minus 175 to minus 205. I get that. Hermansson's been to a way higher height than Dolidze's been to. And has earned, I guess, more. But no, I'm really I'm really worried that we're going to just see Dolidze win this. Eric Anders versus Kyle Daukaus is a fight that should be really easy for Daukaus to win. And what I mean by that is that Eric Anders is a mess. Any prolonged exchange is a mess. Any denial of the clinch from him makes him a mess. He is a mess at range. He is a he is a mess in the pocket. He is not even particularly not a mess in the clinch, or particularly has a great wrestling game, but he is super strong in the wrestling in the clinch. I trust Daukaus almost in every regard to be a better fighter. I trust him to be a better grappler. I trust him to be a better scrambler. I trust him to be a better boxer in the pocket. I trust him to be better at range. And he's also, I think, the taller fighter. Yeah, 2 inches taller, 1 inch in reach. So he has an outside game to use. But 2 things. 1, I've said this about so many fighters when they're fighting Eric Anders, and then they just have Eric Anders' fight with them. And 2, well, we kind of went through it with Daukaus against Dolidze, where he went right into the wheelhouse of Dolidze. And Daukaus always does that. His UFC debut against Brendan Allen was like a perfect example of this. A fight where he had multiple pathways to victory and just refused to avoid the one thing that Brendan Allen was beating him on. And that's why this could be a really bad fight. I'm still going to pick Daukaus because I think maybe even having Anders' fight, Daukaus could maybe win. And I'm picking him by decision because Anders is a tough guy. He's not been finished. Daukaus is not a major finisher or anything. Not a super athlete, not a super hard hitter. So, yeah, he's got a really good Darce choke. So if we get a finish, I'm taking Daukaus by Darce. But picking Daukaus by decision. He is the favorite, minus 220 to minus 226. That is a super close line. And Anders is a plus 175 to plus 191 underdog. But this has bad fight written all over it. Like, in a way, I like the matchmaking for Daukaus because at some point I want to see Daukaus smarten up. I want to see Daukaus have a game plan where he goes out there and he fights someone to their weaknesses because he has the game to do it. In that regard, it's cool. And I guess you could also argue that there really is no fight with Eric Anders at middleweight that doesn't have potentially shitty fight of the night. Downside, I guess is the word I'm looking for. So you might as well do this. Nico Price versus Philip Rowe. I like Philip Rowe. He's insanely tall. He's 3 inches taller and has 4.5 inches of reach against one of the biggest guys in his weight class, which is Nico Price. He's a calm fighter. He's a pretty underrated grappler. He puts pretty good combinations together and everything, like calm under pressure and everything, like has all the fundamentals, but we have yet to see it click. Because his biggest win up until this point has been, take your pick, Jason Witt or whichever Koshi brother he beat. By the way, the fact that I don't even remember which Koshi brother is which probably tells you all you need to know about the Koshi brothers. And the fact that I don't view them as necessarily worse than Jason Witt tells you everything I need to know about Jason Witt. And that's why I got to pick Nico Price. Like, Nico Price is no one's idea of a proper fighter, a technical fighter. He's supremely awkward. His striking is awkward. His wrestling is awkward. His clinch is awkward. His grappling is somehow awkward. But it also somehow works. Very strong, very powerful. He'll apply power from like ridiculous angle. Like some of Nico Price's knockouts are the stuff of not beauty. That's the wrong word for them, but fascination maybe is the word I would use. The James Vick knockout For example, the Tim Means knockout. The Randy Brown knockout is probably the perfect example of that. And, he's really not lost anything but like kind of the best or like super athletes. Michelle Pehea, super athlete. Vincente Luque, title contender at one point. Jeff Neal, title contender and also, well, maybe not title contender, but top 10 fighter and a dude who's pretty athletic. Abdul Razak Al Hassan, who is, for about 2 minutes of the fight, exceptionally dangerous and knocked him out in 43 seconds. And Luque again. There is elements of Philip Rowe in these guys. He's got the same kind of long arms and like submission game that Luque caught him with. He's got some of the insane reach. Actually, no, reach has never really been a problem. None of these guys are particularly that much longer than Nico Price. Interesting. I kind of always thought that would be a problem for Price. But anyways, I'm taking Nico Price. If Rowe beats him, I'm not surprised because Price is a fighter that does almost everything wrong. And at some point, there has to be a downside to that. And Rowe does everything right. Like, there's a lot of fundamental to like about Philip Rowe. There's a lot of size there. But yeah, I'm not ready to pick it. I don't think Price hasn't seemingly been on his way down really in any way. Like, yes, he's been on a bit of a rough streak and he hasn't been winning lately. He did win his last fight against Alex Oliveira. But, the loss to Michelle Pehea, the majority no contest with Donald Cerrone, which is a fight that he probably won, if not for a point deduction, and the loss to Vincente Luque. Like, it has been since 2018 that we've seen Nico Price win 2 fights in a row. So there is that downside. But I still think that he's above Philip Rowe. Odds are really close, though. -128 to -148. So Price is the favorite to Rowe's +108 to +120. Angela Hill versus Emily Ducote. I'm in the bag for Angela Hill. But at the same time, I've also come to kind of the appreciation, realization, come to MMA Jesus moment that no, she's never really going to be anything more than like a gatekeeper to the rankings. But she's a fun fighter in that regard. She just doesn't really have like the massive physical edge. And she does have some serious fight IQ issues that I have ranted about at length, where she is kind of like Kyle Daukaus, overly willing to clinch with people who want to clinch with her, / doesn't really have the tools to avoid it. Bright side, Emily Ducote is not a clincher. In fact, actually, I think Angela Hill can weaponize the clinch in this fight. Ducote is a relatively short, because she's an inch shorter and 1.5 inches less in reach than Hill. Kind of range kickboxer, good hand speed, good power, hurts people, keeps the pace up, throws combination, throws good volume. I like Emily Ducote. I just feel like there's a solid physical limitation to her game that I thought, and in fairness, I thought Jessica Penne would exploit it, and she didn't. But that I feel like Angela Hill can. Like, you're giving up Hill's range, and range striking with Hill has never been a path to any kind of convincing victory. Almost everybody who's beaten Angela Hill has at some point had to either primarily force a grappling game on her or at least be able to threaten it. Because you're talking about people like Verna Jandiroba, Amanda Lemos, Tisha Torres, Michelle Watterson Gomez, Claudia Gadelia, Jenna Nyan, Rhonda Marcos, Courtney Casey, Nina Nunez, Jessica Andrade, who I haven't watched that fight in a long time, probably actually did not wrestle her, but is just the freak. Even Rose Namajunas deigned to wrestle with her when they fought. And Ducote doesn't have that. Ducote doesn't have that clinch game to neutralize, doesn't have that strong physical edge, doesn't have a super intrinsic, like, she can grapple. She absolutely can grapple, but it's not really a weapon for her. So I've got Hill doing what she needs to on the feet, being the craftier fighter, I guess. Not necessarily the better striker, because I think on a technical level, Ducote might actually be the better striker. But Hill has been here for a really long time. She knows how to pile up volume. She knows how to take small advantages and make something out of them. And as a result, I'm picking her by decision. This is an even money fight, apparently, because you can find Hill minus 101 to plus 105, Ducote at minus 119 to minus 128. So I guess Ducote is the favorite. I get it. She's kind of the new hotness. She's coming in. She's got some hype. And it's rightfully so. But I was... And I guess this is also a sort of a maybe don't listen to me on it. I was doubtful when she fought Penne, and I'm more doubtful here. And with Penne, it was just a physical thing. With Angela, it's just not a matchup she traditionally loses. All right, into the sad fights. Clay Guida versus Scott Holtzman. Holtzman 2 inches taller and 1 inch shorter for the reach. Oh boy. Hot Sauce has not won a fight in nearly 3 years. He's been out with injury. He's almost as old as Guida. Actually, somehow feels more shot than Guida. Like, I know there was a time when I thought like Holtzman could be something. He was a really good anti-wrestler, hit with good power, didn't mind an in-close engagement as a striker, could dirty box, did all the things I guess you would expect from a hockey enforcer. But and as much as Guida is obviously such a shell of his former self, like, come on, the Clay Guida that went to be a title contender for a long stretch of time doesn't get submitted by Claudio Puelles. But he can still wrestle. He can still push a pace. He can still take a punch somehow. I don't feel good about it, but I'm picking Clay Guida in 2022. Almost 2023. Oh, my Lord. He is the underdog, plus 134 to plus 154. I don't blame it. Holtzman the favorite, minus 165 to minus 180, but I have no more faith in Holtzman. And the thing is that Guida actually has a track record of delivering when I have no faith in him. And Holtzman doesn't. Now we just on to like a full-on sad fight. Michael Johnson versus Mark Diakese. Michael Johnson, despite beating Alan Patrick, I have no confidence that he can win a fight that involves someone willing and able to wrestle with him, take him down, put him on the mat. He hates it, or he really loves getting choked. I don't know which it is. Like, he loves the rear naked choke position, or he has the greatest phobia about like actually practicing grappling. He really should have been something like one of the most frustrating guys to come off a tough in a long, long time. Diakese is not a good wrestler. I want to be clear on that, but he is a capable wrestler with the physicality to make it work. The Bone Crusher nickname is very apt. He's super strong, has immense grip strength. I'm taking him by decision. I don't know if I put him in a minus 305 to minus 340 favorite to a plus 220 to plus 260 underdog for Johnson. But yeah, sure, why not? Speaking of which, we're going to talk about the betting line on this next fight here. Jonathan Pierce versus Darren Elkins, and Pierce is a minus 450 to minus 549 favorite. And Elkins is a plus 340 to plus 380 underdog. Listen, I'm picking Jonathan Pierce here. I'm probably not going to pick Darren Elkins against anyone at this point. Well, no, I shouldn't say that, because I picked him against Tristan Connolly, I picked him against Garagori, and I picked him against Derek Binner, and he won those fights. I'm not going to pick him against anyone that like firmly actually seems to belong in the UFC, as UFC caliber, both as a technician and as an athlete. But Jonathan Pierce should never be minus 500 plus favorite. Am I wrong on that? Has that betting line changed? Was that a misdo here? Okay, I'm on best fight odds. I'm looking at Elkins versus Pierce. No, that is it. Minus 460, minus 450, minus 500, minus 480, minus 520, minus 480, minus 444, 55, minus 549. Oh, come on. That's amazing. In their primes, I would have picked Elkins to win this fight. You don't out Elkins. And Pierce is kind of a new age Elkins. He's a little bit better at striking, but he's a grinder and a guy who opportunistically will submit people with chokes and do his thing. But there's not really a ton there. But at the same time, Elkins just eats damage at this point and probably will follow so far behind that. And his wins tend to be like either a guy like Garagori who can't grapple, or a guy like Connolly who's just so far below the UFC athletic meter. I've actually grappled with Tristan Connolly. It's one of the few times I can say, like, grappled with a UFC dude way before he was a UFC dude, admittedly, but felt completely fine doing it. It's just kind of weird that he made it. I am stunned. I am legitimately stunned that the guy I have had experience with in the gym that made the UFC is Tristan Connolly. Oh boy. And then Derek Minner, who just gasses when he doesn't get his way. Pierce doesn't gas. He seems like he is like reasonably put together. He isn't, and particularly he's not going to gas just beating Elkins' butt. So yeah, Pierce by decision because he's not a super hard punisher, and I don't think you can choke Elkins still. But I wouldn't be surprised if it ends in a finish. Tracy Cortez versus Amanda Hebush is a classic example of a fight that I would easily pick Hebush to win if it wasn't for the size differential. I know Cortez is only 2 inches taller and actually has less than has less reach, half-inch reach shorter than Hebush. But Cortez was small, but didn't look at a place at bantamweight. And this fight is at flyweight. Hebush, not particularly big at strawweight, fighting at flyweight. I don't know what's going on with the weight cut. I don't know what is causing her to take these fights. But when you're Amanda Hebush and your main advantage is, to be honest, power, she hits hard and she's very, very strong. Being the smaller fighter is going to be a hard sell. And I'm not, to be clear, if this is a long-term health or even short-term health issue, that she just can't make the weight, then she shouldn't make the weight. But it does mean that against someone like Cortez, who has a pretty good grappling game in her own right, is a very good wrestler, is not a great striker by any means, so I guess is possibly open for a hard shot, but has a good chin, isn't a grotesque defensive striker, I'm going to pick her. And I'm picking Cortez by decision. She is a minus underdog. You can get her minus 102 to minus 115. Hebush is minus 105 to minus 125. So basically a pick 'em fight. But yeah, which I agree with. Because I'm saying I think Hebush is the better fighter. I just think that what we have here is a between strawweight and flyweight fighter fighting a between flyweight and bantamweight fighter. And they both have games that kind of are very much about being stronger and more physical. So, there you go. Natan Levy versus Gennaro Valdez. I'm picking Levy by submission because Valdez comes out so hard and gasses himself and self-destructs that he's just going to get tired and get submitted. Levy seems very tough. Now, to be clear, I have serious doubts about Natan Levy. Dude looks like he's cut out of stone. Looks like he's a golem. But at the same time, like, seems incredibly uncoordinated. And, like, everything technically with him is janky and not even in a Nico Price way. Like, I was talking about Nico Price being, like, super weird and super awkward. It feels like Price is trying to be awkward, though. Like it feels like there's method to the madness. With Levy, it feels like he's trying to be a textbook like striker and so on, and it's just never coming through. Like there just isn't the hand-eye coordination. But I trust him to weather the storm and then put Valdez away. And it's kind of the same with Francis Marshall versus Marcelo Rojo, although I'll talk about the odds real quick. Minus 189 to minus 205 for Levy, plus 155 to plus 170 for Valdez. Francis Marshall, Marcelo Rojo. Marcelo Rojo is a big puncher. He's Valdez with less pace and less gassing issues. Like I think he can actually fight hard at a reasonably good pace for 15 minutes. But there's just all kinds of holes in his game. There's problems with his wrestling. There's problems with his grappling. There's problems with his defensive striking. And I see Marshall getting the takedown, getting the submission, and picking this one up. I will say this, though. Francis Marshall is the only debuting fighter on this card. And he is what I would like to say is the problem somewhat with the Dana White Contender Series. Not like he is the problem, but he's an example of a problem of Dana White Contender Series where you'll get a young, rather raw fighter who comes on to Dana White Contender Series and then ends up in the UFC, takes some hard losses, and we've lost them as like a long-term prospect. And what I would really love to see on the Contender Series, and they've done this because they did this with Greg Hardy, is sign a fighter to a developmental contract where you give them a stipend to train. They can take fights. They don't have to stay out of the octagon with LFA or whatever, but do not bring them into UFC until you've given them some, like, give them a year, 2 years, whatever it is, a stipend to sort of like what they did with Joe Pyfer and paying his rent. But like, let them develop. You have Fight Pass, like, because like LFA and CFFC and so on, like these and FAC, these are all on Fight Pass. You can actually make Fight Pass destination for viewing these guys and use Dana White Contender Series to sort of hype up the regional promotions and make that a much more lucrative option. And then you bring them in. But instead, Francis Marshall is here. Like I said, picking him to beat Rojo, minus 152 to minus 175 favorite, plus 132 to plus 140 for Rojo. But there is a loss in Marshall's future where his high volume, high paced, aggressive, persistent striking game with a really, really immobile head that is there to be just absolutely walloped on is going to get him knocked out. Because he's not an amazing wrestler. Like he trained wrestles pretty well, but his initial shot is not great. He has to persist for everything. And he's going to get knocked out. He is going to get knocked out. I don't think it's here, but it's going to happen very, very soon. Jasmine Huargui versus Estela Nunes. Huargui's a big favorite in this fight. Minus 315 to minus 340. Plus 250 to plus 270 on Nunes. Surprised by that? Nunes is actually a pretty good striker. And her problem has historically been people who wrestle her. Like Ariane Carnelossi just kind of physically bowled her over like a bowling ball. And Sam Hughes' success came late in the fight when she started to really turn on the grappling. Huargui's just kind of a volume striker. I'm picking her to win. Don't get me wrong. I'm picking her by decision. I liked what I saw in the Jasmine Lucindo fight from her. But this is a way more... this is a pretty large step up from Lucindo. I get that Nunes is 0-2 in the UFC. Although I thought the fight with Hughes should be a draw. Although I also have no sympathy because she got a point taken away for eye poking and she poked the eye a lot, which suggests there's a certain level of discomfort that she has when somebody just doesn't go away when she hits them, and Huargui is super tough. Another reason to pick Hourgui here. But I just think that people are overlooking it. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, again, picking her, but to have her be one of, I think, the 5 biggest favorites on this card. Let's see here. The following people are bigger favorites than Jasmine Hourgui. Rafael Dos Anjos, Matthias Nicolau. I'm scrolling down. Jonathan Pierce, which we went over. That's a weird one. So yeah, she's tied with Mark Diakese for the 4th biggest favorite on the card. And I don't know. I just think that this fight is way more difficult than that. Nunes is a good counter striker. She's got good power. She's got good feel for it. She's got fast hands. She can throw combinations. She is a good striker. She has a fundamental flaw that I think will prevent her from ever being particularly successful in the UFC. But against other strikers, I think there's a lot of potential here. Anyways, I'm looking forward to that fight. I'm really looking forward to that fight. That's a really good opener. I'm going to be at the computer getting ready for this fight card kind of early as a result of that. So, good on the UFC for that. Don't really have anything else to add. Let me just have a quick look at Bloody Elbow to see if there's anything, which is my news site of choice, not my only one. I mean, obviously there's the fact that Glover Teixeira is kind of getting boned over here because those who are not aware, Glover Teixeira, Yuri Prohaska pulled out of his fight with Glover Teixeira for the UFC 205 title. And obviously that was the only title fight on the pay-per-view. So the UFC may have convinced him, or maybe he just vacated the title because of his Bushido honor code. And as a result, they wanted to do Ankalaev versus Glover for the title. And Glover said, I would fight Jan Blachowicz now, but I want more time for Ankalaev. Because it's a new matchup. He's fought Blachowicz before. And I would want that time too. You're asking for a very late notice opponent change. And instead of just doing like Glover versus Jan, it's probably a bigger fight than Glover versus Ankalaev. Let's be honest. The UFC has kind of like smited their face and like basically are on their way to like tarnishing Glover by saying he's like, he didn't want the fight or whatever. And it's like, he did. He just wanted more time to prepare. He wanted a couple of extra weeks. It's not even like he's like, I need like 6 months. He's like, no. He wanted like a month. There you go. I don't think there's really anything else going on here. There's still Anthony Smith and Conor McGregor back and forth. There's this weird $1 million sparring challenge between Jake Paul and Paddy Pimblett, which I don't know why MMA fighters who are greatly offended by Jake Paul, it seems, do not just ignore him. I don't really get that. Anyways, we finish off with the fact that to above, below, beside, to the right, to the left, there is somewhere, depending on where you're listening to this, a Linktree link that takes you to everywhere my podcast lives, plus my Discord, plus my Twitter, plus my YouTube, plus my Twitch. So if you're a big old fight nerd like me, you can join the Discord, join in on the Mixed Martial Arts Simulator, which is really fun. I think so anyways. And it's pretty. There's a pretty high number of people on there. You can also talk about wrestling. We got a wrestling simulator. We have a slam ball simulator, which if you are unfamiliar with that, it's basically full contact basketball with trampolines. So there you go. Otherwise, enjoy it. This is probably the best where you get a fight night card for a while. I would have split up the 3 really sad fights, but hey, it's not the end of the world. There's going to be a sadness part of the card, and then hopefully we can get back to good stuff. So enjoy your day, and enjoy the fights.